Hello, welcome to the Nigerian Investors Podcast, the unofficial podcast that tracks and reports on the activities of the Nigerian boss. My name is Moody, and with my colleague Aye, we will be hosting this podcast. TNIpodcast is dedicated to stimulating a renewed enthusiasm among the general population with regard to the activities of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Ultimately, the goal of TNI is to see that many Nigerians from all walks of life, both at home and in the diasporas, become active participants on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Before we go further, we would like to place on record TNI podcast is solely for educational purposes and not a replacement for professional financial advice. Let's begin. Hello, welcome back to the Nigerian Investors Podcast, TNI for short. The podcast where we talk about investment in Nigeria with a special focus on the NSE, the stock market in Nigeria. We are your hosts, Moody and Aye.
Good day, everyone. It's nice to be here once again. I think the Christmas break is over and we're all excited to make some money, right?
Yes.
Nice to be here once again.
Yes, it's nice to be here too. And the stock market has not let go with the activities that was going on towards the end of the later part of 2024. And just the few days into 2025, we've seen that the market has been unrelenting in terms of the movement and all that. What do you think about it? What's going through your mind when you see the market the way it is right now?
I'm just thinking whether because the fixed income market always has this inverse correlation with the stock market. So
Yes.
my best guess, or rather my speculation, is that since we've not seen any clear direction on where fixed income are going to be, it's possible that a lot of investors are just taking advantage of the really cheap stock prices, especially, we'll be getting dividends at least by this Q1 going into Q2 and all of that. And we've seen mostly insurance stocks being the stocks that are even gaining a lot of attention. I think that sector, rather that subsector, is offers quite very very cheap stocks. So yeah, that's what we've seen so far. So good. We just hope the momentum continues at least for the whole market, because I mean, it's always a good thing to make money, and I think the stock market is relatively undervalued.
Yes, it is, especially the NSE. Like you said, those insurance stocks, they are very cheap. Most of them are in the Kobos, they are penny stock or Kobo stocks as you have it in Nigeria. And I think most investors, like what you just said now, they're trying to push their funds into these cheap stocks in order to take position before the rest of the market realize what is going on. And I think most of the time is these institutional investors that are driving the market right now, as well as those pension fund managers. If you really take a deep dive into what is going on, I think that's what you'll find that unlike January that I'm usually used to in the NSC, in the past, January is when people tend to, because they haven't overspend during the Christmas period, they're looking for money to maybe fund their children's school fees, try and rebalance their businesses and all that. They go into the stock markets to take profit in order for them to meet some of their demanding needs. But this year's January is looking different, and everybody is happy. When it's green, everybody is happy. I hope when it turns red, nobody's gonna win.
Yeah.
All right, let's look at a topic for today's episode, and that topic is compound interest. If you are an added follower of this podcast, you will realize that the very first episode that we released, we did mention compound interest, though we didn't really go in deep detail. We thought it wise to bring it up in this episode and talk about compound interest. We want to look at the power of compound interest over time. And if you've passed through the 4 walls of a primary school, you must have heard of this word in your arithmetic class. I think they call it arithmetic in the primary school. Anyways, that has been a long time. Yeah, you must have heard about compound interest. And compound interest is something that is very fundamental when it comes to financial management and investment is a fundamental financial concept that has a profound impact on personal savings as well as investments and debt. Most people don't really factor in compound interest when it comes to debt. But in this episode, we're going to elucidate more on this and try as much as possible to do justice to it. So that at the end of the day, the goal is to enlighten our listeners and make someone a bit better in terms of making financial decisions. Compound interest worldwide has been known as the eighth wonder of the world. Even Albert Einstein, the genius, said compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. Those who understand it, they earn it. And those who don't, they pay for it. And I think we should be able to do something justice to that in this episode. It is called the eighth wonder of the world because of its remarkable ability to grow money exponentially over time. It is unlike simple interest because in simple interest, the interest is calculated on the original principal. When we say principal, we mean the initial capital, the initial money that you invested. That is your principal. For simple interest, your interest is calculated based on the principal. But in terms of compound interest, both the interest you earn and your principal, they generate more money for you. And that is what makes it the eighth wonder of the world. These unique characteristics makes it a powerful tool for wealth accumulation as well as financial planning. Every investor, whether you're big or small, whether you are an institutional investor or you are a retail investor, you need this tool called compound interest. And Aye is going to take us through this compound interest, and I'll also ship in one or two information about compound interest before we call it a day. Over to you, Aye.
How does compound interest work? Because, like Buddha has said, it's the eighth wonder of the world. I like to think of it as the only wonder of the world because of the great power it has on our overall portfolios. I mean, if you're an investor and you've been investing for a while, you know that the power of this simple thing can make you exponential wealth over a very long period of time. I think time will be subjective in this case, right? How exactly does it work? Well, the idea behind compound interest is that by reinvesting the interest earned on the principal grows with each compounding period. Like Moody said, it's different from simple interest where interest is earned on the original principal and just that, and then the interest is just sort of removed from the investment. In the case of compound interest, the interest is then reinvested back and added to the principal. The interest for the first period becomes the principal for the second period and it's added to the original principal. And that creates another principal amount again that is going to earn an additional interest. For example, if you consider 1,000 naira that is invested annually over a period of, say, 10 years and is generating 5% interest, in 10 years' time, you will have that 1,000 naira now grown to 1,600, approximately 1,600 naira. And that's because the original 1,000 naira is the principal, right? For the first year, for 5% interest, you make 50 naira. And that 50 naira then adds to the principal of 1,000 to make 1,050 naira. So for the second year, it's not just the 1,000 naira alone that's generating interest. It's also the 50 naira added to it. And that just increases the interest that you're going to generate for the second year. And it just keeps on adding, over time, so on and so forth. It just keeps adding and adding and adding. Of course, the interest rates will determine how fast or how high the money grows. I mean, in this example, we're using 5%. But you'll be surprised that even 6% would multiply this money even higher. I mean, 6% alone will make this end balance a lot higher than 1,600. And that's the power of compound interest. That even just a few percentage points extra will make a huge difference. And that's why it's a very, very powerful tool that investors should always keep in mind. When you're investing, you should just think about, how am I going to grow this money? It's not just the first year you've earned maybe 20% or 30% or 40%. You should also consider growing that wealth. So whatever you've earned, you should consider leaving it there, right? Let it be reinvested and let it itself accumulate interest on its own. I believe it was the richest man in Babylon that referred to it as you invest money and the money gives birth to children, and then you put those children to work as well, and they also
Give
eventually
birth to
give
children.
birth to more children, and it's a very very powerful tool to quickly grow your wealth. What are the advantages of um, compound interest? Well, like we said, it's very good for wealth accumulation. It's the
Mm-hmm.
cornerstone for long-term wealth creation. Yeah, and the interesting thing here is that the earlier you start, the better for you, right? And this is always why
Yes.
we recommend investing should. It's something that children, in fact, parents should even start for their children because I mean, by the time you're old enough to leave your parents' house, it would be nice that your parents are handing over a good investment for you, right? Someone who starts compounding at age of 25, right? Even with the same amount of money, even this 1,000 naira, this 1,000 naira compounding at 5%, you'll be surprised that that person will make a whole lot more money than someone who started at 35. I mean, because by the time they both stand on the same place, right? Maybe some years down the line, the person who started at 25, maybe 10 years down the line, the person who started at 35 would have maybe 5 years down the line. You'll be surprised that the person who started at 25 has more money, even with the same compound growth rate, because he has had more time for his money to compound over the long term, and that has just helped him accumulate his wealth. It's always a good idea to start as early as possible. Another advantage of compound interest is that it passively grows your money. I mean, this one is it's a no-brainer. The way compound interest works, right, it requires independent input, additional input from the investor. You have your money, you've invested it, it's generated interest. That interest is just automatically reinvested to generate even more interest. It's kind of like that. It's passive. Your money is just growing for you on autopilot. I mean, in some cases, you might have to put in some effort. You might have to decide, okay, in case of stocks, for example, you might have to decide to sell some stocks. But then for some stocks, I mean, some investors buy these stocks and they don't sell them ever. They just hold them and they just keep compounding and growing. I mean, I think a good example is something like Presco. Did you know any other examples? I think Presco, Okumo Oil are good examples of stocks that, if you look at their charts, they've been growing over the long term. They've been growing for years. Investors who have invested in them have just seen their money grow over the time and hasn't stopped.
Yeah, I think there are many examples apart from those two stocks. We have NACO. I think we also have
Yes, thank you. A
Med-
stock that I
yeah,
missed and still pays me
yeah,
to today. A very good compounding machine, even. Yes,
yeah,
because you look at the chart of that stock and you just can't help but feel glad for investors who bought these stocks very, very early. I mean, this stock was trading
yeah,
at is it Kobo
yeah,
per share? And now
yeah.
it's at tens of
Almost
units.
40.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's something that investors should definitely consider. I mean, you can imagine just buying that stock. How many years? 20. You
Yes,
buy that stock then, and then you just held onto it, and you didn't even do any additional work. You
anything.
just held
Yeah,
onto it, and it's paying dividends even, and then it's growing. You,
yes, it's
you can
growing.
imagine. You can imagine the double-edged growth for investors. They are making money on dividends. They're also making money on capital appreciation.
And as
It's a
well as
very good
bonus.
thing. Yes, yes. I
They
mean,
need the
this is something
bonus.
that stock market investors really sometimes they gain a lot of money from. Some people even
Yeah,
call them quick money machines. I mean, you still have to pick the right stock. Obviously, you have to do your homework. It's not just every stock on the market, but some stocks, some companies are delivering these incredible returns to investors. It's something that investors should consider very very carefully.
yeah,
Another advantage of compounding is that it encourages long-term thinking and discipline. And this is something that is always overrated in investing, right? People often think, oh, you have to be very, very smart to invest in the market. You have to be very intelligent. Yeah, you have to be smart, but more importantly, you have to be patient and you have to be disciplined. Like in the case of NACO that we just mentioned, you can imagine you just did your homework. Of course, you have to continue constantly monitor the company to make sure that fundamentals are not going bad and the company is doing well and management is doing fine. But
hmm,
consider how much effort you have to do just to watch your company grow every year, versus just having the money sit there and just keep growing and compounding for you. Right? It's the discipline and the patience that makes the biggest difference in investing. You have to be smart, you have to be intelligent, yes. You have to put in work, you have to do your homework, you have to research, you have to read. But more importantly, when you found a good stock and you are continuously monitoring this good stock, more or less, the effort you're putting in is just almost zero. I mean, you're just letting your money grow for you and compound for you, and it just constantly makes you more wealth over time. How do we apply compound interest? It's not just limited to savings, investments, and all that. There are so many ways you can apply compound interest, and one of them is a retirement savings account.
Yeah. I would like to talk about this aspect when it comes to the pension fund and using compound interest to generate money for employees towards their retirement. Back in 2004, during Obasanjo's tenure, there was this pension act that was passed into law, creating a new organization called the Nigerian Pension Commission. And this pension commission has a mandate to ensure that both public and private companies in Nigeria, they make sure that they have the contributory pension scheme for their employees. Contributory pension scheme simply means that the employer and the employee, they contribute towards the employee's retirement on a monthly basis. And this fund is managed by the pension fund managers who are under the purview of the Nigerian Pension Commission. So what happened is that these pension fund managers, they are allowed to invest this money into different financial instruments like stocks, like bonds, like treasury, money markets, and all that. And this money that they are investing, which is for the employee towards their retirement, this money generates interest on a regular basis. And this interest is further invested into the financial instrument that generates this interest in the first place. So it generates more interest upon interest, because the reason why it's like that, these employees, they don't have access to the money until they get to a retirement age. Because of that time that they don't have access to the money, the pension fund manager have the opportunity and the mandate to continue investing this money in safe financial instruments that can generate interest. And this interest keep on generating interest upon interest alongside the principal, thereby having a compounding effect. At the end of the day, when the employee gets to the age of 65 or whenever they retire, then they can access this fund, and this fund becomes something that has accumulated wealth for them over this period of time. That's the beauty of compound interest when it comes to the pension fund in Nigeria. The other application is the education service accounts. These educational plans are offered by many investment banking companies. We have the UCAP, we have the Mansard, AFC Mansard. We also have AROM. These companies, they all employ this educational trust fund where you can save money towards your child's university education, even their secondary school education, especially if you plan on sending them to a private institution where they pay a lot of money. All these plans, they utilize compound interest, because whatever you generate from those education plan and retirement savings accounts, the interest that you generate, they are plunged back into the plan to generate more money. Like I said, you give birth to a child, your child gave birth to another child. You're not a granddad. Before you know it, you're not a great granddad. Before you know, you're not a great great granddad. And it continues
Mm,
non-stop. That's applications that you can use when it comes to compound interest. Compound interest cut
mm, I,
across every aspect of our life, not just by buying stocks alone. If you if you have plans for your children, you want to send them to good schools and you're saving towards it, compound interest can work. If you want to build maybe your own personal property and you're saving money towards it, compound interest can come in as well. Another compound interest application, which most people don't really see, they don't think about it. Banks, they use compound interest when they give out loans. It's because when you borrow money from the bank, money principal that you borrowed, you're going to pay it back. And until you pay that back, you're required to pay interest. That interest is paid based on compounding. Until you pay it off, your principal, you're going to continue to pay compound interest. It's used in debt management as well. And if you're not very careful, for you as a borrower, you might end up accumulating a lot of debt, more than just the actual loan that you've taken. That's another aspect where you can apply compound interest. And compound interest has its own challenges as well. It's not all smooth sailing. Some of the challenges that comes with compound interest is that it can also lead to financial strain if you don't manage it very well. A good example is the debt management that I talked about. If you are someone that borrows money all the time and you don't know how to manage your debts, you might fall into a deep a deep well where you find it difficult to come out of because you'll be drowned in debt. It can just spiral out of control due to the compounding. Then inflation can also eat into compound interest. It's good for you to use the principle of compound interest in your investment activities, but you have to make sure that your returns from the compound interest beats inflation. Why do we talk about that? Because 10,000 naira in year 2000 is different from the 10,000 naira that you can today. Inflation has eaten deep into whatever money that you've been able to earn. So you have to make sure that your compound interest, the way you are compounding it, you're careful that inflation doesn't take it away because inflation is real. So that's on that you have to consider. When you put your money in the bank for savings, inflation is going to eat deep into that money. Those are some of the challenges when it comes to compound interest. Aye is going to take us through the role of time in compounding because he already mentioned time that when you start at the age of 20 compared to someone that started at the age of 30, you already have that 10 years gap. That 10 years in time is going to be very significant. Even though you contribute less, let's say you contribute 5,000 every month, and someone that starts at 30 is contributing 50,000, you're still going to beat that person when it comes to compounding because you add the advantage of time. Time is very important when it comes to compounding. Aye, what do you think about the role of time in compounding? After that, you can just conclude for us so that we'll call it a day.
Okay. Like Buddy said, compound interest is a very powerful force that instills discipline and long-term view. And time is just one of the biggest advantages when you consider compound interest. Imagine an investment that doubles every 10 years. You can just imagine the growth that investment will have after 30-year period or a 40-year period. Time is the most important and one of the most crucial factors that would help you maximize the benefits of compound interest. I like to think of it in terms of the time you start, which is always the biggest. I think is the one thing you have the most control over, time. If you start as early as possible, right? And then obviously the compound growth rate also affects the overall return. I mean, if you have two people who started with the same amount of money, say 100,000 each, person A 100, person B 100, and they are both growing their money over a 10-year period, but then the person A is growing his money at say 10% and person B is growing his money at 5%, you will find that person A would obviously have more money than person B. Start early, start investing now, and allow your money grow for you over the long term. So that's the role of time in compound interest. It's very, very important to understand and recognize the implication of compound interest and debt. Even like Moody said, with inflation, right? Inflation is constantly eroding the purchasing power of money, and it's a compounding thing. It's a compounding thing when you think about it because every year we have this inflation rate, that inflation rate, and it just means that the purchasing power of the naira has dropped by so and so percent as of last year, and then it drops again, right? It's compounding. By the time you consider how much a naira or 100 naira could afford, 5 years down the line versus how much you can afford now, you start to see how much the purchasing power has eroded over the long term. But that's why it's also a good idea to invest at a rate that you are generating higher than inflation, and that just means that your money is preserving its value over the long term. For me personally, it's not just money when you think about it when it comes to the power of compound interest. So many things compound. Experience compounds, knowledge compounds, discipline compounds, character compounds. These things compound, and over the long term, when you keep consistently growing and applying this willingness to learn new things, willingness to learn the right things, right? Willingness to grow, willingness to. I mean, there are so many books out there on how to create wealth, and if you're willing to read, and then not just read, you're willing to practice what you see in these books. These things compound. Some people they'll look backwards at where they are right now, and then they look backwards at when they started, and they can see that growth that's happened to them over the long term. So everything compounds. So it's definitely something that to think about. It's not just money, but money is a very good example. It's one of the most obvious examples of compound interest.
All right. Thank you so much, Aye, for that. I think we've been able to do justice to compound interest. And until we meet again, bye for now. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Favorite Podcast that brings insight to the Nigerian stock market. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. To get more episodes like this, follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, as well as on our website. All this information is available in the show note below this episode. Until we bring you another episode your way next week. Bye for now. TNI Podcast is executive produced by Moody. This episode was edited by Rona at Rockwari Village Studio.